February 11, 2012. The Beverly Hilton Hotel. Clive Davis was preparing for his annual pre-Grammy party downstairs. Champagne was being poured. Celebrities were arriving. The music industry's elite were gathering to celebrate. But 4 floors above, in Suite 434, Whitney Houston lay dead in a bathtub. The official story was simple: accidental drowning, heart disease, cocaine use, a tragic end to a troubled life. But the hotel housekeeper who found her saw something that night that didn't match the official narrative. Something that's haunted her ever since. The scene was staged. The timeline didn't add up. And the people who were supposed to protect Whitney were nowhere to be found. This is what she witnessed. And once you hear it, you'll understand why Whitney's death was never properly investigated. Why the questions were buried along with her body. And why the party went on, just hours after she died. The housekeeper had worked at the Beverly Hilton for over 15 years. She'd seen everything. Celebrity meltdowns, drug overdoses, affairs, fights. Nothing shocked her anymore. But she'd never seen a death treated with such casual indifference. Such calculated detachment. She arrived for her shift at 2 p.m. on February 11th. The hotel was buzzing with Grammy weekend energy. Assistants rushing through lobbies. Stylists hauling garment bags. Security directing traffic. It was chaos. Beautiful, expensive chaos. Around 3:30 p.m., she was assigned to check on Suite 434. Whitney Houston's suite. The note said the guest had requested fresh towels earlier but hadn't answered the door. Standard procedure was to enter, leave the towels, and exit quietly. The housekeeper knocked. No response. She announced herself. Still nothing. She used her master key and entered. The suite was a mess. Clothes scattered across the floor. Room service trays stacked on tables. Champagne bottles. Prescription pill bottles. Makeup smeared on the bathroom counter. It looked like someone had been living there for weeks, not days. The housekeeper moved through the space, straightening as she went. Then she reached the bathroom. The door was partially open. Steam was still hanging in the air. She called out again. No response. She pushed the door fully open. And that's when she saw her. Whitney Houston. Face down in the bathtub. Water still running. Completely submerged except for her legs, which were bent at an unnatural angle, feet resting on the edge of the tub. The housekeeper froze. Her training kicked in. She backed out of the room, radioed security, and waited in the hallway. Her hands were shaking. Her mind was racing. But even in that moment of shock, something felt wrong. Security arrived within minutes. Then hotel management. Then Whitney's entourage. Her assistant. Her hairstylist. Her bodyguard. People flooded the suite. The housekeeper was told to wait downstairs. To say nothing. To let them handle it. She complied. But she kept replaying what she'd seen. The position of the body. The running water. The strange marks on Whitney's arms. The fact that the bathroom door had been partially open, not locked. If someone drowns in a bathtub, wouldn't they thrash? Wouldn't they try to pull themselves up? Wouldn't there be water everywhere? But the floor around the tub was dry. Almost pristine. Like someone had cleaned it. Recently, paramedics arrived at 3:55 p.m. By then, Whitney had been moved. Pulled from the tub. Laid on the floor. Covered with towels. The housekeeper watched from the hallway as they worked. But she could tell from their body language that it was too late. Whitney was gone. And she'd been gone for a while. The timeline didn't make sense. Whitney's assistant claimed she'd last seen Whitney alive around 3 p.m. But rigor mortis was already setting in when the paramedics arrived less than an hour later. The housekeeper wasn't a medical expert, but she'd seen enough to know that didn't add up. Bodies don't stiffen that quickly. Not unless they'd been dead for hours. Downstairs, the pre-Grammy party was in full swing. Clive Davis had been informed of Whitney's death. He consulted with his team, with hotel management, with publicists. And then he made a decision. The party would continue. There would be a brief acknowledgement, a moment of silence, a tribute, but the show would go on. The housekeeper couldn't believe it. A woman had just died 4 floors above. A legend, an icon. And the industry was toasting champagne and dancing to her songs while her body was still warm. It felt obscene, disrespectful, calculated. Like Whitney's death was just another inconvenient detail in a weekend full of logistics. The housekeeper tried to process what she'd seen. She kept thinking about the bathtub, about the way Whitney's body was positioned, about the running water, about the bathroom door being open. People who drown in bathtubs are usually found with the door locked, with signs of struggle, with water spilled over the sides. But Whitney's scene was too clean, too controlled, too staged. The housekeeper mentioned this to one of the other staff members, a woman she trusted, someone who'd worked at the hotel even longer than she had. The woman pulled her aside and whispered, "Don't ask questions. Don't talk about what you saw. They'll make you disappear." The official toxicology report came back weeks later. Cocaine, marijuana, Xanax, Flexeril, Benadryl. A cocktail of substances that, combined with heart disease, led to unconsciousness and drowning. Accidental death. Case closed. But the housekeeper couldn't let it go. She started researching, reading articles, watching documentaries, digging into Whitney's final days. And she found things that deepened her suspicions. Whitney had been acting erratically in the days leading up to her death. Paranoid, scared, telling people she felt like she was being watched, that someone was following her, that she needed to get away. But every time she tried to leave, someone convinced her to stay. The housekeeper also learned about the financial situation. Whitney was in debt. Deep debt. Her record label was pressuring her to tour, to record, to perform. But Whitney was exhausted, addicted, fragile. She wanted to retire, to rest, to disappear. But the industry wouldn't let her, because she was worth more alive and working than dead and silent. Or so they thought, until they realized that a dead Whitney was worth even more. The posthumous album sales, the documentaries, the biopics, the licensing deals. Death transformed Whitney from a struggling addict into a tragic legend. A marketable martyr. The housekeeper started connecting dots. She thought about the timing. Grammy weekend. Maximum media exposure. Maximum emotional impact. She thought about the party continuing downstairs. About Clive Davis' tribute speech, which felt rehearsed. Prepared. Like he'd known what was coming. She thought about Whitney's entourage. How quickly they arrived. How calm they seemed. How controlled the narrative became. And she thought about the bathtub. About how someone would have to hold a person underwater for them to drown in that position. How impossible it would be to accidentally fall and stay submerged like that. She tried to go to the police, to share her observations, to demand a real investigation. But she was dismissed, told that the case was closed, that she was traumatized, that she was seeing conspiracies where there were none. The hotel offered her a payout, a severance package, a non-disclosure agreement. She refused at first, but then the threat started. Anonymous calls, cars following her home, break-ins where nothing was stolen but everything was moved. Just enough to send a message. She got scared, signed the NDA, took the money, and tried to forget, but forgetting was impossible. Because every Grammy season, the tributes would air, the montages, the retrospectives, everyone crying about how much they missed Whitney, how tragic her death was, how she was taken too soon. And the housekeeper would watch and think, you let her die. You pushed her to the edge. And when she fell, you threw a party. She carried that anger for years, that guilt, that knowledge, and it ate at her, destroyed her sleep, ruined her relationships, made her question everything. Then in 2022, a new documentary came out, one that asked questions, that challenged the official narrative, that highlighted the inconsistencies, and the housekeeper felt a spark of hope. Maybe people were finally ready to listen. Maybe the truth could come out. Maybe Whitney deserved justice, even a decade later. So she started speaking anonymously, to podcasters, to bloggers, to anyone who would listen. She couldn't use her real name, couldn't show her face. The NDA was still active, but she could share what she saw, what she knew, what she believed, and what she believed was this: Whitney Houston didn't accidentally drown. She was either killed or allowed to die, by people who stood to gain from her death, people who controlled her career, her finances, her image, people who saw her as a product, not a person. And when that product became too damaged, too difficult, too expensive to maintain, they made a calculation. They let her go. And they profited from her death in ways they never could have from her continued survival. The housekeeper doesn't have concrete proof. She doesn't have a smoking gun. She doesn't have a confession. But she has her observations, her instincts, her experience with death and staging and human behavior. And she knows what she saw in that bathroom didn't match the story she was told. She knows that the bathtub scene was wrong, that the timeline was impossible, that the reaction from Whitney's team was too controlled, too prepared, too calculated. She also knows about the other deaths, the pattern of artists who died right before major career moments, right before tours, right before album releases, right before they were about to expose something, or leave, or break free. Artists whose deaths were ruled accidents or suicides but felt like something more, something darker, something systematic. Whitney was just one name on a long list, a list that keeps growing, a list that the industry refuses to acknowledge. The housekeeper is speaking now because she's tired of carrying the weight alone. Tired of watching Whitney's legacy be sanitized and commercialized while the truth rots beneath the surface. Tired of seeing the same people who failed Whitney profit from documentaries and tribute concerts and hologram tours. She wants people to know that Whitney's death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a crime. Maybe not in the legal sense. Maybe not in a way that could be prosecuted. But in the moral sense. In the human sense. People who should have protected her didn't. People who could have saved her chose not to. And people who benefited from her death did so without remorse. The housekeeper doesn't expect justice. She's not naive. She knows how power works, how money works, how the entertainment industry works. But she hopes that by speaking out, she can plant a seed. a question, a doubt. In the minds of people who consume Whitney's music, who watch the documentaries, who celebrate her legacy, she hopes they'll ask themselves, what really happened in that hotel room? Why did the party continue? Who benefited from Whitney's death? And why has no one been held accountable? This isn't just about Whitney Houston. It's about every artist who gets chewed up by the industry and spit out broken. Every person whose value is measured in dollars and streams and ticket sales. Every human being who becomes a commodity and loses their humanity in the process. Whitney was a voice, a gift, a light. And she was extinguished not by her own hand, but by a system that consumed her. The housekeeper wants people to remember that. To honor Whitney not just as a singer, but as a person who deserved better. Who deserved protection. Who deserved life. The bathtub in Suite 434 has been replaced. The room has been remodeled. Guests stay there now without knowing its history. The hotel has moved on. The industry has moved on. But the housekeeper hasn't. And she won't. Because she was there. She saw. And she refuses to let Whitney's death be just another celebrity tragedy. It was a murder of opportunity. A murder of indifference. A murder that was covered up with champagne and tributes and Grammy performances. And until someone admits that, until someone takes responsibility, Whitney's ghost will linger. Not in that hotel room, but in the conscience of everyone who knew the truth and stayed silent.